Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all our witnesses for being here today. I mean, Congress should be concerned more with the economic crisis that's unfolding before us, an unprecedented worker shortage coupled with rising inflation and energy prices. But instead, this bill forces through trillions in new spending and is fixated on raising taxes. So much so that President Biden will break his promise and raise taxes on those who make less than $400,000. The Joint Committee on Taxation found that 2/3 of Biden's corporate tax hike will be felt by middle income taxpayers, including small businesses that file taxes as individuals. It's not honest to say this legislation, which the New York Times describes as touching virtually every American at every point in life from conception to old age, won't cost a dime. That's clearly not true. The many new social spending programs in this plan won't create economic growth. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates it'll actually lower federal revenues by around $1.2 trillion over the next decade. The administration's budget even acknowledges that growth isn't a priority for them in the ideal world. It only forecasts a meager 2% GDP growth by 2023, with it dropping even lower until 2029. Many inside Washington seem to think that just because a bill spends lots of money, it's automatically a good investment. But Washington has a lousy track record of spending taxpayer money. Out in the real world, spending money doesn't magically make money. The so-called good investment gets worse when you dig into the actual details under the hood. Much of it will go to force Americans to do what a bureaucrat in Washington decides is good for them, like what car to drive. The Green New Deal provisions would make working class families across the U.S. pay more in taxes so that millionaires in California can write off a new electric vehicle. The bottom line is the agenda is not based on reality. It's going to crush small businesses, even though it's got a poll-tested slogan like Build Back Better. I hope that we get serious about the dire financial situation our country faces. U.S. took in more than $3.4 trillion in revenue last fiscal year. If we took time to prioritize spending, that could very well be more than enough to support the United States government. Dr. McBride, as you know, the evidence shows that higher tax rates do not always yield higher increases in revenue. For example, despite the wide variation in federal marginal tax rates over the years, in the 60s, they were even as high as 90%. The share of federal revenue has remained relatively steady in the post-World War II era, ranging between 15 and 20% of GDP. Indeed, scholars at your organization have pointed out that many studies show income reported by taxpayers falls as marginal tax rates rise. Punitively high tax rates not only increase incentives to shift or underreport income, they also have a high economic cost. How should policymakers think about the trade-off between high tax rates, raising revenue, and economic performance?
Thank you. That's a very important thing to remember, that it's like you said, it's not that simple. Raising rates leads to more revenue in every case. Probably the most extreme example demonstrating that is capital gains. This is widely recognized from the history of changing tax rates on capital gains, that there's a sort of revenue maximizing tax rate of about 28, 29, 30% in that range. And that's what the Joint Committee on Taxation assumes as well. This is widely understood in revenue estimating among revenue estimators. So, for instance, that is well below the 37% average capital gains tax rate that would apply when factoring in the state capital gains rate under the House bill. So another example there is corporate taxes. And so here we can look at across the developed world, countries that have generally been lowering their corporate tax rates quite a lot over the last 40 years, roughly in half. Come down from around 40, 50% corporate tax rates in most countries down to closer to 20% on average. And what has been the impact? Well, on revenue? You might think that revenues would have collapsed across all of these countries. In fact, they have been fairly stable as a share of GDP and actually increased moderately in many cases. And that's over this very long period of time. So there's something going on there along the lines of what you're talking about. Reported income goes down. The production of income, incentives to generate income go down. as marginal tax rates increase. And it can be a very large effect.
Well, thank you. I wish I had more time because I want to talk a little bit about the budget deficit and the increase there. But thank you for enlightening us on some of that. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.